You're listening to Rogue Table Talks. Here's Mike.
And here we are back. Rogue Table Talks. Yo, number 132, 132, RTT 132. Christmas edition. Rogue Table Talks. It's a Rogue Table Talks Christmas. Merry Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
Happy Christmas. Merry Christmas to you. Yes, this is will be, as we record this, it is December the 16th. So we'll release it in a couple of days, maybe the 18th. So obviously the week after that's Christmas. We're not sorry people. This is our Christmas present to you. You won't get another. Sorry, not sorry. And so we'll pick this back up in January. So this will be the last 2021 edition of Rogue Table Talks. And you can find us where all good podcasts are found on the internet, and those podcast like apps and such, Spotify and Apple Podcast and Google Podcasts and whatever else is out there. So like us, subscribe to us, tell your friends, and so on. Here we are, RTT. And so, are you getting? I know you have a tumultuous end of the year, moved, all that stuff. Are you like Christmas wise? Are you? I mean, we're a week away. No, a week and a day away from Christmas Eve. So, are you? How you doing, man?
I feel like I have these old Christmas plates and cups that were from Dillard's from years ago.
Okay. Yep.
And they have the night before Christmas on them, and I love them. So I feel like this week I finally kind of have settled in to it. Feels like I'm able to, I don't know how to say it, celebrate Advent, kind of be settled, kind of have some calm mornings with Christmas lights up, and really kind of enter into the season, because it's been pretty chaotic for us and for me, and I'm moving twice and trying to stabilize and all that and travel, but it's good. It's been really good. So we have a ton of small family rituals that we do, certain movies that we watch, certain things that we bake and all that stuff. So we've been really doing that. It's been
cool,
very nice.
You're into a ritual. We have our Christmas decorations up. I think for the most part we have our presents bought, although our kids are now old, adults, and our grandkids are too young to be, I don't know, in the pre-Christmas frenzy. I don't know. We have at least a couple of years maybe for that. So it's kind of in a sweet spot as far as that goes. Christmas morning for us is pretty laid back. I think we probably all try to gather for brunch at like 10:30 or 11 a.m. So, it's pretty laid back. It's pretty slow paced. So it's kind of nice, actually.
I think our kids will sleep in probably past 8 or 9, which they're just tired.
Which is a huge, 15. Yeah, right, correct. Yes.
I don't miss the 5:30.
No, right. We used to have to say you can't come wake us up until like 6:30 in the morning or something. Like you can wake up and then for a while when they were a little older, you can go like look at your stocking and then come wake us up at whatever 6:30 or 7. So those days are long gone. So they were sweet when they were we're going through them.
Magical when you're in it.
But it's nice to not be in it anymore. So as far as the Christmas edition goes, I thought we would kind of look at in Luke 2. There's a kind of the famous passage, the Linus, Charlie Brown, the special. He quotes from this in the King James, but I thought I'd place that in this, just in a sense of blessing to the world, because glory to God in the highest heaven, on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests. And this glorious thing they went and told about, where does that all fit in the God's plan of redemption? And I thought I would start, and you probably could do this a lot of different ways. I want to briefly look at 4 passages together. The first is Genesis 12, 1 through 3, which is a sort of a seminal, a key passage in redemptive history where God makes a promise to Abraham before he's even Abraham. He's still Abram. And in Genesis 12, 1 through 3, The Lord had said to Abram, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. I will make you into a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and whoever curses you I will curse, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you." So let's talk about this first promise. God gives similarly worded promises, but maybe a little more expansive, later in other places. But this is the first sort of promise and covenant to Abram. And so, just what are your thoughts? Let's just start general, big picture. Your thoughts about that passage and how it just fits into God's plan.
Yeah, I was just thinking, when I look at this, I'm trying to think previously, this feels like the promise par excellence.
Mm-hmm.
Like, in creation, you don't necessarily have this promise, but you have a covenant arrangement with Adam and Eve, submit to my ways and have dominion and da-da-da-da-da. And then you do have a promise to Noah. You have the Noahic promise that I won't flood the earth like this again. But this promise of, it's like the launch pad for redemption. Okay, I will fix everything that's wrong. I will bring blessing because there was curse invoked because of human's fall. And I will bring blessing through people. And I'm going to pick a person, do it through a family, create a nation, and I'm going to bless all the families of the earth through this. And to me, the rest of the scriptures, even Christ's return, is viewed through the Abrahamic lens of this promise, I think.
Yeah, I think that's right, and that's some of the ground that we'll cover here. As we're talking about this today, that in a sense, the birth of Christ is one part of the unfolding fulfillment of this promise that has sort of many stages and many phases, as you mentioned. It has to start somewhere. This is where God starts it, and but that ultimately it is a promise to Abraham, but then it's a promise through Abraham just to the whole world, which includes us. We just got done looking at Galatians, where that's what Paul's saying is Abraham. This is before the law. There's no temple, or there's no promised land yet. There's no nothing yet. This is maybe the first hint of a promised land, where he says, "Go to this land, I will show you." And it's very simple. God makes this promise to Abraham, and Abraham believes him and acts on it. And that belief, that faith in God to fulfill his promise, is the basis for a right standing with God. And it's sort of the basis for the blessing going forward. So it's like Abraham is an example, but he's also like the start of this unfolding plan of God just to redeem all things and to bless the world. And I don't think it's easy to forget how how comprehensive this promise is. If you read it in Genesis 12, it just sounds like God's talking to some dude, right? He just picks some dude out of the crowd, and yet he did do that. And at the same time, he's talking to me. Like, this is a promise to me as well as a promise to you as well, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Father Abraham had many sons. Many sons had Father Abraham. I'm one of them.
And so are you.
I mean, the gospel writers pick up on that in the epistles really quickly. Those who believe and trust in the promises of God are children of Abraham. So
right.
That's one of the great mysteries of Christ, is that we, non-Jews, non-children of Abraham, get to be included in the promise because of Jesus.
Yeah, and then that promise unfolds. There is, later on, there's a promised land, that's given. There's a law that's given. There's a temple that's given. This identity, this national identity, that all comes from the root of which is, natural descendants of Abraham. Other people can become part of Israel, but so that unfolds, and then through that, there are promises of a next stage of fulfillment, which is, what we say at Christmas. And that's Luke 2:13-20. Suddenly a great company of the heavenly host appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests." When the angels had left them and gone into heaven, the shepherds said to one another, "Let's go to Bethlehem and see this thing that has happened, which the Lord has told us about." So they hurried off and found Mary and Joseph and the baby, who were lying in the manger. When they had seen him, they spread the word concerning what had been told them about this child, and all who heard it were amazed at what the shepherds said to them. But Mary treasured up all these things and pondered them in her heart. The shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all the things they had heard and seen, which were just as they had been told. So, part of this blessing, this promise of blessing, of course, the next big phase of it is a Savior is born. That, God's peace comes through this baby, this good news of great joy, this, substantial fulfillment of this promise. And it's a promise to Abraham because, it comes through people who are naturally descendant from Abraham. It comes through, this is the tribe of Judah, right? One of the descendants of Abraham. And, this next stage of this fulfillment to redeem all things and to bring blessing to us and to bring blessing to the world. And it's maybe a way of looking at Christmas that's a bit different than we can sometimes look at it, which might be more individual. God sent.
Say more about.
Yeah. Yeah, like God sent Jesus so that I wouldn't go to hell. I mean, that's sort of a crass way of saying it, but in a sense, that's true, of course. But he sent his son. He came in the form of his son. God the Son came so that the blessing promised through Abraham could be substantially fulfilled, and that blessing is large and many faceted. And we'll talk about a few of those, in the next few minutes. But it's way beyond, me not having to sacrifice a goat anymore, or me not having to, keep the law anymore, or be circumcised anymore. It includes all of those things, but it's about me and it's about my family, my loved ones. But it's about way more than that. It's a big story.
Yeah, and we talk about this quite a few times, or at least we reference it, so we won't go into it in this brief podcast. But it's way more than Christ died for me to give me the gift of salvation. In Christmas, we celebrate gifts and receive gifts. It's way more than that. It's not less than that, but that's not always the most helpful framework. It's Christ died to remove the impediment of the curse so that we could continue to give blessing to all families of the world.
Yes.
And then he did come as a gift, and he is a gift from the Father. It's all very clear, but it wasn't just so I could simply receive salvation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what's interesting to me is that it's this big sweeping promise, this big cosmic, through all history to all peoples fulfillment. Here is Jesus born, in Palestine in the Middle East a couple thousand years ago. This promise made. But it's that, and it's also comes through a promise to Abraham. Mary is chosen. Again, similarly, it's like, it isn't as though Mary had somehow earned the right to be the mother of Jesus. Somehow, I guess, supposedly, or one could guess she hasn't disqualified herself in some way, but, that God selects people and blessing comes through them. So there is a particularity to that, but there's also this universality to it, that there's part of this big sweeping story, but individual actual people are also involved, which I think is kind of cool. You kind of get both of those things, right?
Well, even back to Abraham, individual actual people bring about huge cosmic blessing, and God chooses them, and yet they could have rejected the invitation.
Yeah, right.
Abraham could have said, "I don't want to leave my father's household." And Mary could have said, "No thanks."
Yep. Right.
You know, they weren't forced into it, and then
Yeah.
we have that same kind of invitation to, if we want to live for the smaller story, smaller mission, my own success, whatever I think that is, then God's He will allow us.
Yeah.
Now, it's not that He won't work in our lives and try to work against that because He knows what's best for us, but He's not going to force us into it.
Right. And I think that becomes, as it gets closer to me, that becomes more immediate. Like my own ability to opt out of how the blessing of God flows through my life seems more immediate to me as it gets closer to me. Like for instance, the next passage I'd like to look at together that's sort of in this progression is Matthew 5, part of the Sermon on the Mount, verses 13 through 16, where Jesus says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot. That you are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." So again, there's this sense of the fulfillment of the promise of blessing to others comes through the fulfillment in us, that we are made salty, we are transformed, we're made light. But the purpose of that salt and light is to be shared and to be spread and to, in a sense, flow over into other people. That blessing and fulfillment comes to us particularly, but then through us. But obviously, yeah, there's ways in which we could sort of opt out of that, right? Bury the talents, not participate, right? And so you can see it here because we all can think of times where I haven't been that salty or I've covered my light up or whatever. So we all kind of get the fact that in some ways I can turn away from it. But on the other hand, I'm part of God's plan to bring blessing to the world as He brings blessing to me and transforms me. I'm supposed to be an agent of that to others. And it's all goes back to, God has a plan, not just for me, but then through me. And I'm called to be a part of that plan. But I could skip out on it, or I could go light on it, or I could turn away from it, or whatever. So what are your thoughts on, tying those three passages together as we are right now, and then particularly the one in the Sermon on the Mount where we're called to be salt and light?
Trying to be succinct, I mean, Abraham was salty. Mary and Joseph were salty. And I mean that in the sense of they were faithful. They weren't perfect, but they were faithful to answer the call and trusted in a way. What's always fascinates me about Abraham is he saw one hundredth of a portion of the promise come true.
Right.
In his own lifetime, and we're like, most Christians are like, oh, I'll see Jesus come back. I'm like, I mean, but even if you don't, the promise, like we're to trust in the promise. And so, yeah, I was just making a list of like, how do we go light on these things so that we forfeit that full privilege of, the incarnational blessing is our own personal sin, obviously, whatever that is, the trappings of sin that we can get caught up in. That doesn't disqualify us, but it can impede the mission, or we can get lost. We can unintentionally get lost. We can lose the plot. We can think it's about the vacation home or whatever else. And I'm not saying those things are bad, but we can ultimatize physical material things that we have, or names or finances. And we lose kind of the plot as opposed to seeing those things as subservient to the mission. So there's a few ways of like, how do we lose our saltiness?
Yeah, I mean, that's,
or us versus them. Like, we just don't have anything to say to the world around us, so we don't have a relationship with them.
Yes. Right. So, yeah, I think that's right. I think, the parable of the sower and, all the different ways in which the seed is unfruitful that we all can experience. And I do think it's in a way, the promise seems very particular and personal to Abraham, that flows beyond him in ways he probably couldn't see. The Jesus was born in one place, and there was a miraculous visitation to one place and time. And then now, so Matthew 5, the salt, we're salt and we're light. Now everyone who's a Christ follower is a display of that blessing to those in such ways that people will see that and give God glory. So now it's like spreads, and in a sense gets bigger. I mean, the fulfillment gets bigger in a way that I'm sure Abraham never probably ever got that full picture while he was alive on earth, and that we can easily forget, and we can prioritize career or possessions or experiences over it. And then the last passage I want to look at is sort of I don't know, in a culmination, at least an earthly culmination of that same idea. For Ephesians 2, starting in verse 19, Paul writes, "Consequently, you are no longer foreigners and strangers, but fellow citizens with God's people and also members of his household, built on the foundation of the apostles and prophets, with Christ Jesus himself as the chief cornerstone. In him the whole building is joined together and rises to become a holy temple in the Lord. And in him you too are being built together to become a dwelling in which God lives by his Spirit." And so you see now the fulfillment of this promise takes place not just in me and in each of us spread out over the world as we're salt and light, but in us together in a way that seems even more crazy, more miraculous. And that we collectively as the church are the fulfillment of this blessing to the world, or at least called to be, and fulfillment of the blessing to each other, or at least are called to be. And what I love about this passage, and just as we put it in this progression here, it kind of uses Old Testament, in a sense, imagery, that we are the new temple, the physical temple that Abraham never saw, because it was so long after him. We have long succeeded that, and now the temple where God dwells in the world is his church. And we are to be a blessing to each other and to the world in a way that I'm sure Mary and Joseph, didn't quite, couldn't quite have grasped. And yet that's our calling. That in a sense is an intended fulfillment of the promise of blessing to the world made to Abraham. Fulfilled to some extent in Bethlehem. Shown to be true as we're salt and light, and then together as we're God's church. It's sort of an awesome, huge, big, epic story of blessing, and Christmas is sort of right in the middle of it.
Yeah, I like that. It is a big story of blessing, and Christmas is in the middle of it. And okay, pet peeve. I don't like it when preachers and teachers jump too fast from incarnation to crucifixion, because the incarnation is a significant event on its own, and they're all connected, but it's like, don't forget he didn't stay a baby. I'm like, yeah, but he became a baby.
Yeah.
Helpless, little, frail. He emptied himself of his glory, maintained his deity, emptied himself of his glorious privileges, and became human. And J.I. Packer says this is one of the most miraculous things of all. If you think about people who say, I have a hard time accepting the miracles of Jesus, well, maybe a wrestling point for them is the incarnation, because if God really became flesh, then it may follow that he was able to do miracles.
Sure.
So there's that. But then another little nugget for me is something I'm very fascinated by. Is a lot of scholars think that in Genesis 1, compared to the ancient Near East, when a divine being was creating a temple, the idea of the divine being resting from their work would mean that they had created a temple, a dwelling place for themselves, and resting means that they were coming to indwell this temple. So a lot of people read Genesis 1 through that lens and think that the whole creation is God's cosmic temple, which I tend to see that a little bit as well. So then you have this idea of Abraham being a people who would be preparing again the creation as God's cosmic temple. And now you have the church with these echoes of you're the temple, but not just the lens of Solomon's temple, but the creation temple, to where this universal blessing will flow, where God will once again come and dwell in and through his people. And the incarnation is a significant picture of the God coming down again to dwell with people, in and through people. And to me, that's fascinating. I think, some people are like, well, the church is dying. Well, the church in the West is struggling. It's not dead yet. But experts say that there's going to be probably 1 billion believers by 2050. So the church has continued to grow. The church, the mission of Christ, the message of the gospel has continued to spread. It hasn't been snuffed out. Continues to bear fruit all over the world. And that's something that you see. We don't talk about that enough, but people are continuing to become Christians. The message grows.
Right. And I do think
blessing is taking place.
Right. Yeah, that's right. And of course, the actual institution of the church can do this poorly or well. Sure. And individual churches can, for a time, do this poorly or well. And of course, we have our own feelings about that and how we've been impacted by a church or our church leader, but all of that might be true and valid to our experience, but that's not even where we're talking about. We're talking about something even bigger than that, even bigger than any individual church, or even the church in America, which is, not by any stretch the majority of church in the world, where we exist to be in relationship with one another. And when we are, then, God in his spirit does dwell in us, and we are to be transformed. And in that process, we're to be salt and we're to be light, and we're to fulfill the promise of being a blessing to the world. And I do think that's, it's part of the, if you want to say it's part of the Christmas story that calls us to something more, that calls us beyond ourselves, to something more. And there will be a final fulfillment, of course, in heaven, when then, the final blessing will be given to all those who are true children of Abraham, who are true children of this original promise way back in Genesis 12. We'll be together, and we'll love one another, and we'll be unified, and we'll worship, and we'll be transformed. And that is something that we can look forward to as well. So I do think our present experience in church might be disappointing, or my present experience of being salty and light may be disappointing or not, or my experience of you being salty.
Before I'm disappointed in everyone else, I probably am a little disappointed in myself.
Right, because that's really what we mean.
Yeah,
when we say I'm disappointed in the church, like I think I'm mad at you because you're not, you did this or that, and we blame this thing called the church, I think. And that I am part of this thing. I can't get away from it, that I can't opt out of it. I'm in this big story. I am connected with these other people. I am part of his church. I am called to be salt and light. I am called to bless those in the church and outside of it. And nothing gets me out of that, in a sense, and nothing, should. And, I think when we celebrate Christmas, it's probably good for us to then remember the promise of blessing being fulfilled there is part of this fulfillment that I am now called to, in a sense. And I am called to be one that people experience the glory of God through. And we are called to be one collectively where people experience the glory of God through, because we're the temple of the Lord. Just like the angel said to the shepherds. And I think it's kind of a neat way of looking at it. And I don't usually look at it that way, really. Yeah. I think, culture gets in the way, right?
A lot of things get in the way. And, a million trees, a million things. As
Yep.
the innkeeper said.
A million trees, a million things.
One last thought. I think that's, Isaac Watts, great theology. He comes to make his blessings flow far as the curse is found.
Yeah.
Far as the curse is found.
Yeah, that's right. So that's where we are. We are still where the curse is found, and we are still the agents of blessing and the receivers of blessing. And so let's end it there. Let's end it with that Merry Christmas message. Grace and peace, and Merry Christmas to all, and to all a good night.
Thanks for listening to Rogue Table Talks. Be sure you're subscribed to our podcast wherever you listen and on our YouTube channel. Just search Rogue Table Talks.